Welcome to DEntremont. Today I want to do a quick review of the Moondrop Starfield. This retails for about $110. This is a Chinese-made earphone from Shenzhen Audio is where I got this. Shipping was pretty fast, so had a pretty good experience. The box is pretty neat. It comes with like a, nighttime scene, some stars, constellations, whatever, and someone looking up into the sky. The box is very beautiful. It's a light, kind of a purple blue with silver embossed letters, the Moondrop logo. It's very elegant, is what I would call it. You open the box up and you're greeted with the earphones housed in this piece here, and then the case. The case includes ear tips and the cable. And it's a slightly wider case than some of the little clamshell cases, and it allows it to just fit in there nice and easy. So that's the case. The earphone cable is very nice. It's blue, kind of matches the theme of the night sky, Starfield. It's a dual pin or 2-pin cable with molded ear guides. So if I can actually undo this here, you'll see that is one thing about the cable that I'll just jump right out and say is it does tangle often. Basically, just the fact that the ear guides are sort of molded in this shape, it's prone to getting the cable wrapped around it and therefore tangles a little bit. If you're careful on how you wrap it, it's not too bad. Nonetheless, so it has the ear pieces, 2-pin. They're very faint, but there are left and right markings here, and I'll show you how they go into the earphone in a second. And then the center of the cable, I'm not a huge fan of this, although in reality it hasn't affected my use of them as much as I thought it would, but this is kind of a honking, chunky piece of plastic in the center here. I wish it was a little bit more streamlined like the JVC, which I'll have in another review. But it's a pretty standard length cable. It's kind of a braided style. Almost seems like something you'd have a do-it-yourself cable made, or, not necessarily cheap, but something you get from a small company who just hand makes cables. The plastic molding on the right angle connector is translucent, which I think is really nice. I love the aesthetic of all of these things. I do like right angle connectors, and this is a small right angle connector and also has a very slim profile, so it should fit in most cases unless the case is extremely deep. The stress relief on the cable is reasonable, nothing amazing. I'd say the cable feels decent. It doesn't feel like the most durable, best cable I've ever used, but it's by no means a cheap cable. I'll put that there. So the earpieces themselves are fairly hefty feeling. I mean, they're kind of, for their size, they're pretty heavy. I think it's because they're made of all metal. They're very nice, very attractive finish. They have sort of that iridescent bluish purple, which I don't know if you can see that on the camera at all, but let me see if I can get closer here. Basically, they have a nice little Starfield compass looking like thing there. The 2-pin connector, the filter in the nozzle there, a vent hole or two. So they're very nice. The other earpiece is just Starfield words, and similar. They have the little I don't know what you call that, but it has small like glittery material underneath the finish, which looks really nice. So that's the earpieces. Underneath here you have a filter removal kit. It's got 6 extra filters and tweezers, and then you have some paperwork here, just basic. It's all in Chinese, so I have no idea what it says. And then the introduction to the Starfield. That's just kind of a little pamphlet on how to wear them and whatnot. That is the case and the earphones. Just a quick overview. Now, for the cable here, the earphones have the nozzle pointing inward, and then from that, the earphone pinhole, it curves around the back like that. So it basically goes, this would be your left ear, so it would go in your ear and wrap around your ear. Unfortunately, like a lot of the earphones that I found lately, they don't have a cable cinch on the cable, which I actually really like that. So basically, if you were wearing this around your ears, you could pull it up to your neck and kind of keep it taut so that it keeps all the noise from being introduced into the cable. It just makes it a little bit more comfortable, less likely to move around. That is the package and kind of an unboxing and the overall design of the earphones. They're very good quality. They're fairly, like I said, hefty. They feel like they're made of a thick plastic or maybe metal. I can't really tell, but they're very durable feeling. I don't feel like these would break if you drop them. Again, the cable is kind of average. The case is nothing special, but it is a good size. I like that it's small enough to be compact and portable, but wide enough that it holds the earphones and the ear tips with no problem. It has a little Shenzhen, a little Moondrop logo on the front, a little gold embossed. The zipper is pretty cheap, but it is what it is, just kind of a general case. The fit of these, you can't see my ears, but they're pretty comfortable. They're not the most comfortable thing I've ever had in my ears, but the weight doesn't really bother me. It doesn't feel at all abnormal. They fit nicely. They don't interrupt any of the bone or cartilage in my ear. They just kind of sit in there nicely, and they are fairly firm, so they're not going to fall out. So I think fit-wise, they're pretty good. They're not the most comfortable I've ever worn, but by no means are they uncomfortable. I'd say they're average. In terms of the sound quality, though, and this is the most important feature to me, these are actually, I'm just going to go out and say these are astonishing quality for the price. $110, and these are very, very close to Harman sort of tuning with elevated bass and elevated treble. I say elevated because I feel like the current Harman target is more of a U-shape than it is ideal neutral. I personally believe that probably the best target, my dream target, is an etymotic target in the upper half, which a kilohertz to higher, and then maybe the 2016 Harman in the lower half, which is a similar bass boost to the current Harman, but a few decibels lower. That, I think, puts the treble and the bass in a very, very even spot and makes everything very smooth and clear without being overly bright and scooping out the mids too much. Now, these actually are very close to my ideal target. In fact, I'm absolutely blown away by the level of quality the sound has on these earphones. The response, even if you look at a graph, is very smooth from the bass up to the treble. There's a slight dip and then a peak at the very highest treble, and it is audible in certain material. However, for the most part, I think that with general listening, if you're not comparing it to another earphone, it's not a striking sound. It's not piercing. It's just, in a direct comparison, you might feel as though there's a little bit of a peak really high up. But the thing is, at that frequency, which when I say high, I'm talking about, above 12 kilohertz, maybe higher even than that. It's not really an irritating or fatiguing sound because it's such a high frequency. In fact, some people that might have a little bit of age-related hearing loss or damage might actually prefer that because it just elevates that up a little bit for you. But there is a little bit of a dip at a little higher than the 10 kilohertz region, so they don't have the most consistent level of high treble and air, but they're still very, very good. In fact, they're better than many, many earphones I've heard for a much higher price. And I know you hear people say that a lot, but I would be hard-pressed to tell you that you could get anything even close to this for $100. In fact, the closest thing to this in terms of neutrality is probably the etymotic ER2, and that's more expensive by almost twice or more. The ER3 is more expensive, 4 more expensive. The Blessing 2, which I'll talk about, is more expensive. The JVC FTX01, that's more. So these are really, really, really good for the price. I think if your budget is less than $200, just stop looking, buy these. End of story. Don't bother comparing or searching. Just enjoy them. They're phenomenal. Now, if you're not looking for a neutral target earphone, then, obviously take that with a grain of salt. Maybe you have to look for something with more of your preference for bass response or whatever. But if you want something that's more in the neutral vein, but still has some good body, bass punch and thickness, and treble smoothness and clarity, these are really, really good. In fact, the treble on these is almost, in some ways, better than even the Blessing 2. But that's another story. I'll get into that in a little bit. So the response to these basically looks like the bass kind of curves down at 100 hertz or so, and then the mids are smooth, and then it rises up with the 2 kilohertz region right at that sort of a Harman target. And then above the 4 or 5 kilohertz, it starts to slope down, and then there's that dip in the 10 kilohertz or so region. So really, it's, for the most part, a very neutral and achieves that target, that Harman-style target. So how does it compare to something like the Blessing 2? Well, the Blessing 2 is a little bit more, I would call, true neutral in the sense that the bass, the mids, and the treble are all more in line with each other. It doesn't sound as much U-shaped as these, or V-shaped, although when I say that very, very slightly. By no means are these V-shaped or U-shaped earphones, but they just tend to be a little bit more in direct comparison to something like the Blessing 2. Now, if you were to take the Blessing 2's bass, for instance, I think the Blessing 2's bass is closer to the probably Etymotic bass, maybe not even that low, but somewhere between Etymotic and the Starfield. The Blessing 2 Dusk is actually very similar to these, but it falls off to neutral a little bit sooner than these do, so there's a little bit less thickness and warmth. These are a warm sort of neutral. They're comfortable, they're relaxing, they're not at all fatiguing in my opinion. What I find is the Blessing is a little bit more well-rounded, if I put it the right way. In other words, it's detailed. These might even have a little bit more open treble, if you want to say that, but the overall sound of the Blessing is more open because of the technical performance. It's a little bit wider in imaging, and the treble is a little bit softer in some spots where this is maybe a little bit harder. So everything on the Blessing 2 might be a little bit more easy to kind of focus on and pick out. But again, I'm talking relatively. If you're comparing these to the Blessing 2, you're talking about a $320 earphone. So that says a lot about these. All price aside, I'd actually say these are probably better on average than the Etymotics for me. Not because it's necessarily more accurate, although that's arguable in some ways, but you get a lot of what you get with the Etymotic, a neutral sound. You get a lot more comfort because it's a shallow fit earphone. You don't have to drive them into your ears. You get more bass, so if you're someone who likes Etymotic but you think they don't have enough bass, these have a lot more bass, and not a lot more in a bad way. They just have a lot more of that low bass that gives you thump and attack and just meat to your music, that has thickness of note, if you want to call it that. The weakest part of these, and it's not weak, but again, in a direct comparison to something like the Blessing, since that's like its parent, is the imaging of the stereo field on these. On the Blessing, it kind of spreads out all around you. On these, it's a little bit more narrow. It's not a narrow earphone, and it's still fairly wide, but when you switch directly between this to a Blessing or something similar, it sounds like the sound goes from a narrow width to a wider and more spacious width. So I would say that's probably the single factor of these that is not as good as some of the other earphones. But A, that's a $100, $110 earphone, and B, they're still very good, and in fact, they're better than a lot of earphones at the price. So that's kind of a general overview of the sound. I don't detect any issue with noise or hiss. I don't detect any spikes or dips in the frequency response that are exaggerated or severe. Only that high frequency one that I explained earlier. Overall, the frequency is probably the best aspect of these, just very smooth, very natural. The timbre, or timbre, if you want to call it that, is pretty good on these. I've heard some that are better. My personal favorite right now is the JVC FDX01. I'd say it's probably comparable to the Blessing 2, but in a slightly different way. This has a little bit more in the 2 to 3 kilohertz, that kind of cool Etymotic sort of cleanness, if you want to call it that, whereas the Blessing is a little softer in that region, but the Blessing, because of the neutrality across the whole spectrum, has a little bit more of a smooth, cool tone overall. It's kind of a hard thing to describe, but in terms of pure frequency response, I don't know that these are better or worse than the Blessing. They're just slightly different. If you prefer a Harman target, I think these are better than the Blessing. If you prefer what I call more of an ideal blend between the Harman and the Etymotic, the Blessing might be better. So just something to consider. So those are the Moondrop Starfield, and I'll have another video soon comparing all the different models that I have here, but these are very good. I highly recommend them. Moondrop so far has had great customer service, easy to talk to, fast shipping. The price is truly unbeatable. Accessories, the case, pretty much everything you get is worth $110, especially when you consider the sound. So if you guys have any questions at all, just let me know, and as always, thank you guys for watching.